so happy that there's such a strong turnout for this event, and I hope it continues year after year, because I think it's great that you can all get together and make new friends, play music with different people, and just keep growing. I am a drummer. Let me give you a little background about myself, though, because I'm assuming I could see this is a varied audience, not just drummers, so I want everybody to be aware of the experiences I've had, and feel free to throw questions at me about any of this. I come from a family of musicians. My father, self-taught on most of the instruments. He learned piccolo and baritone horn in an orphanage near Buffalo, and that started him with that piccolo embouchure. He was able to segue into clarinet, and also with the baritone horn, he was able to segue into all the brass instruments. Taught me and my two brothers. My brother John was on the faculty here for 22 years. Many of you probably know him. He has written and arranged for everybody in jazz and beyond, and I'm talking about the best of the best from Basie on down. My brother Pat, fantastic woodwind player, also an educator. He taught at Humber College in Toronto for 40 years. He's played most notably with Buddy Rich and Elvin Jones. Why he bothers to call me, I have no idea. But that's just because I'm in the family. I taught also at a college in Los Angeles for 28 years called California Institute of the Arts, but I'm getting way ahead of myself. In our formative years, my brothers and I got started in music from my father, and that bond has lasted right up till today. We're still as close as we ever were because of the music and because of our family environment. And that's been the best part of this experience for me, going through life as a musician with my brothers and sharing our experiences and taking pleasure in the success of each other. After high school, I went to Berklee College. After Berklee College, I worked for Uncle Sam for 2 years in an Army band. And after that, I went out on the road with Woody Herman. And Woody's band was a fantastic experience for me. That big band training is very important, I feel. It's a pity there aren't big bands anymore for young people to come. I mean, there are, of course, in colleges, but I'm talking about that practical experience of being in a band, playing every night for a different audience and growing together. That's sorely missed. After Woody, I went to Chuck Mangione for 4 years. Chuck was just starting to get some traction as someone who was finding his own voice, playing music that was rooted in jazz, but was trying to arrive at something different, and he certainly did very successfully. After those 4 years, I moved to New York City and started just being a sideman for anybody I could, and I was very lucky. Got to play with some of the best musicians around. Right off the bat, I got to work with Jim Hall for a couple of weeks. Art Farmer, Phil Woods, the Brecker Brothers, John Schofield, So I had, that part of my life was very significant because it prepared me for what was to come next, which was joining Bill Evans' trio. That was, without a doubt, a musical highlight, probably the musical highlight of my life. It was brief, just under 2 years, but then again, if you look at some of the watershed moments in jazz, they don't last all that long, So you have to enjoy it while it's there and just learn from that and grow from that. After Bill passed away, I joined Tony Bennett. I was with Tony for 11 years. And it was important at the time because it offered me and my family a certain measure of stability that I sorely needed, because the world of jazz is uncertain at best, but still worth the risk. After Tony, I moved out from New York to the West Coast. I've been living in Los Angeles since 1987. And on the West Coast, I had a similar experience with working with a lot of the elder statesmen in jazz on that coast. Bud Shank, Connie Condoli, Lou Levy, Jack Nimitz, Teddy Edwards, on and on. So And then, of course, the younger generation as well. I've toured extensively in Europe and in Asia, and I've worked with, in jazz, I've worked with orchestras, big bands, small groups. So that's quite a palette to be able to draw from, and I welcome any comments or questions along those lines. Oh.
Where do you fall in the family line? Are you the baby, are you the oldest, are you the middle child?
I'm the baby, but that's not saying much these days, because, yeah, I am the youngest. My brother Pat's the oldest, John's right in the middle. John likes to refer to himself as the well-adjusted middle brother. That is true, top to bottom.
I'm there with him.
So, let me tell you a little bit about my experience with Bill Evans, and this is not a promotional tour here, but I did write this book, and it was a labor of love because Bill died in 1980, and for the next 20 years, I started to just collect memories, and I would put them down on paper and come back to them periodically, but I never really formalized it into a book. In, I guess it was about 8 or 9 years ago, I decided I needed to make this thing, to formalize it, and I turned it into a book. One of my graduate students at Cal Arts, Charles Levin, a fine drummer, but he also had many years as an investigative reporter for a newspaper in California. And his skills came in very handy because we ended up tracking down a lot of people and getting them to either verify or refute what my memories were. And I have to say, 9 times out of 10, my professor, my memory was pretty good. So this book is a compilation of a brief history about me and my family, and it starts in Sicily with my father. It's a very interesting story, and it continues through high school with my brothers and college at Berkeley, and then all of us going out on the road, and then my journey as I just laid it out for you. And I was aware of Bill Evans as a child. My brother Pat brought home an album called Jazz Track, which included 3 tracks of the Miles Davis Sextet with Cannonball Adderley and John Coltrane and Jimmy Cobb and Paul Chambers that absolutely mesmerized me. I had been listening to Lester Young, and I've been listening to Dizzy and Bird, and I've been listening to bop piano players and swing piano players. And when that record came on Green Dolphin Street was the track, I was mesmerized because it was unlike anything I'd ever heard before in my life. And the rest of those tracks were equally mesmerizing. And then, of course, that was followed by Kind of Blue, which we listened to non-stop, over and over and over again, absorbing every note. I could probably sing everybody's solos on every tune on that record because I listened to it so many times. And it's the detail that goes into music that fascinates me. Today with the ensembles, I was just pointing out little things that can help make that bigger picture more musical, more enjoyable. And that's because of the way I listen to music. I was always actively listening to each participant. I wanted to know why was Jimmy Cobb or Philly Joe, why were they responding that way? And I'm listening to Paul Chambers and I'm thinking, well, he's playing that note because of what he's hearing from Miles or from what he's hearing from Wynton Kelly or from Bill Evans. So each artist in the band, each musician was offering something to the music that was bringing it all together. I never just listened to the drums, for example, because as exciting as it was, it's too narrow a perspective. You need to look at this music more broadly. And that's been my modus operandi my whole life, because one comment that I get from musicians repeatedly is that I make it comfortable and make it easy for them to play, because I am always listening to the other musicians. I'm always paying attention to what they're doing to try to make them sound their best. And if you're a rhythm section player, I urge you to think about that, because it really is about everyone else before it's about you. Anyway, back to Bill. So, I was working in New York, and my name was being thrown around here and there, and it turned out that Bill needed a drummer. And so he and Helen Keene came into a club I was working at called Hoppers with Toots Thielenn, great harmonica player. And Bill and Toots were buds, and they had just recorded an album. So Bill came in, and I was introduced to him, and they stayed for a set, and they were complimentary. And then the next day, Helen called and asked me to come to their gig at the Vanguard the next time they were playing there, which I did. I played a set with them, and I guess Bill liked what he heard and hired me for the trio. That's pretty much how it's done, you know. In the world of music, and in the world of jazz in particular, it's word of mouth, and then it's showing up prepared, you know. Having done the homework, I had been listening to Bill Evans since I was 12 years old. Now, I didn't know exactly what music he was going to be playing that night, but I was very familiar with how he approached music, because I had listened to so many different versions of his trio, and listened to so many different recordings. I was prepared to see what I could add to that music. And that's an important thing also. Now, I mean, I don't think anybody here is going to be going out and auditioning for a band in New York City anytime soon, but if that actually was to come to pass, you need to know who it is that you're trying to work with. It doesn't even have to be New York. You need to know what is expected of me in a musical situation. You need to be ready to participate actively, not just show up and be a competent player, but actually be able to add something right away to the music. And I think that's what helped me to get that job. So back to Bill and on Green Dolphin Street. So after I'd been with the trio for a while, I said to him, you know, man, you remember that introduction you played on Green Dolphin Street with Miles and Coltrane? And he kind of looked at me kind of puzzled, you know, and he didn't remember it. And he sat down at the piano and started to play the tune, and of course it was completely different than what he had played the first time, because that's what jazz musicians do. Now we as fans, we'll listen to a record and we'll fall in love with a particular version, and we'll think that the artist themselves, you know, feel the same way about it, and that's absolutely not the case. Whenever Bill was asked about Kind of Blue, he used to say, you know, we all just showed up and did our professional best. We were just there, you know, there was no ceremony, you know. I mean, in our minds, we were conjuring up all of this romantic fantasy about surrounding this music, but it was really another day in the studio for them. And eventually, many years later, Bill was listening to the radio, and that track came on, and he said, you know, he kind of got a bit of the feeling that people have been talking about, because he'd been hearing about that record for so many years. He'd also been hearing about the recordings, Waltz for Debbie and Sunday at the Village Vanguard, those live recordings from the Vanguard with Scott LaFaro and Paul Motion. People have been telling him over and over and over again how fantastic those were, how groundbreaking. And his comment was, well, you know, those recorded tracks represent about 50% of what we actually achieved that week. In other words, they had reached such heights that week that far surpassed what's on those recordings. But thank goodness those recordings were there, so at least we get a glimpse of 50% of what they were capable of. Let me tell you a little story about the trio, about that particular trio. When Bill left Miles Davis, Miles wanted to help him get some work, so he went to his manager, Jack Whittemore, and said, you know, call Willard Alexander and see if you can get Bill some work. So Willard Alexander gets Bill 3 weeks at Basin Street East, opposite Benny Goodman's big band. Now, Bill was a relative unknown at the time, but he took the work and gratefully took it. His first trio actually was Kenny Dennis on drums and Jimmy Garrison on the bass. Kenny Dennis, if you don't know, has played with everybody from Sonny Rollins to Miles to Bill Evans, and was married to Nancy Wilson for many years and was her musical director. Kenny and I are buddies in New York to this day, and he is the very first drummer with Bill Evans, and I'm the very last drummer with Bill Evans. We like to make that known whenever we're together. But that trio starts out opposite Benny's big band. Now, Benny has been off the scene for a while, and so it's a big deal. Limousines are showing up, chauffeured limousines are pulling up in front of the club, dignitaries are getting out, sheiks, ambassadors. The place is packed. Benny and his band are being regaled in the back room with steak dinners and champagne. And Bill and the trio, if they want a Coca-Cola, they gotta pay the bartender $2 to get it themselves, right? So this is the treatment that they're getting, which didn't bother them, right? But then they came off the bandstand and found out that the microphones were turned off deliberately while they're performing. Okay, once again, Bill just chalks us up. We gotta fulfill this job. Well, the guys couldn't take it, so Kenny leaves and Philly Joe Jones comes on board. And now when Philly joins the band, it starts to happen. And in spite of the fact that there are no microphones, they start to get applause. So now, all of a sudden, the manager comes up to Bill and says, you can't let your drummer solo anymore. Now, I don't know if this was coming from the manager or if it was coming from Benny, who was notoriously jealous of anyone getting the spotlight other than himself. But Bill said, I'm not gonna do that, I'm not gonna tell him. But the manager went over and told Philly, so Philly quit. In that 3-week period, Bill Evans went through 7 bass players and 4 drummers. And at the end of it, it was Scott LaFaro and Paul Motion. And so, upon reflection, Bill said, this is what was necessary to find this group, because what he was looking for was a commitment. He wanted 3 musicians, 2 other musicians besides himself, a commitment to be a part of a band, and let's just see what happens. Let's see how far we can take this. And that's what happened. And commitment is a word that resonates in Bill's world over and over and over again. He was committed to being a jazz musician. He was committed to playing music of a high quality. And he was committed to having a group that could record and not have any interference from a record company. So he could go in and record what he wanted to record, make the music he wanted to make, and have a career in jazz. And he achieved all of those things.
What year was that?
The trio with Scott LaFaro and Paul Motion?
When he started with Benny Goodman thing?
Well, Bill was in the Army during Korea, so when he got out in '54, he moved back to his parents' home in Plainfield, New Jersey. Now, at this point, he graduated college, he'd been on the road with a big band, Herbie Field's big band. Some of you may have heard that name. It was a good swing-style band in the style of Lionel Hampton, and it was a good experience for Bill for about a year. And then he entered the Army and was in Chicago in the Army band. So he was working around Chicago for 3 years. So with all this experience under his belt, he still felt the need to prepare before moving to New York City. That's more of that commitment I'm talking about. He's not just going to show up and see what happens. He's going to really prepare himself. And he really worked hard in that year and a half period. He hits the scene in New York in 1955. So by 1959, Miles had already heard him and hired him for his band. But another example of his commitment to this music is sometime between 55 and 57, his name was being, brought up over and over again as an up-and-coming young artist. He had distinguished himself at Brandeis University when they had a composer symposium where they featured music from contemporary classical artists and jazz. So the contemporary classical artists were Morton Gould and Gunther Schuller, and the jazz artists were Charles Mingus and John Lewis. And both sides of the aisle wanted Bill because of his sight-reading skills at the piano and because of his incredible jazz. So also the word is spreading around Manhattan about Bill Evans. And he gets a call from Tony Martin, a singer who, does anybody remember that name here? I wouldn't imagine. Mike, you old dog, you. You and me, Mike. Tony Martin was a singer in the style of, let's say, Tony Bennett, for example. He was a tenor, and he sang popular songs. He had a very successful career. And his office called Bill Evans and offered him $25,000 a year. Now, we're talking 1956. That's a princely sum for 17-week commitment. So 17 weeks of your life are going to be committed to this guy to play his music for 25 G's, and then the rest of it is your time. And Bill said it took him 10 seconds to tell the guy no, because he realized that if he committed to something like that, it was going to deter him from his path. So that's another firm example of his commitment. And because of that, he ended up paying the dues that everyone pays, but he also got to play some incredible music. I've listened to a lot of Bill Evans in my life, and I've read a lot about him, but yesterday I was in my car, and I had my phone on, audio, and it was just going down from A to Z tracks, and it got to a track called All About Rosie that he recorded with George Russell. You need to listen to this track, especially if you're a piano player. Rhythmically and harmonically, there was nobody that was anywhere near him at the time. The things he was doing were revolutionary. And another example of the impact he had on Charles Mingus, for example. Bill got home one night at 4 o'clock in the morning after a gig, and there was a telegram waiting for him. Another thing that only Mike and I could remember, telegrams. Right? And the telegram was from Charles Mingus saying, I need you for a record date at 10 o'clock this morning, can you make it? And of course, Bill showed up. And so I read the music, and it's an album called East Coasting, Charles Mingus, and I recommend you check that one out because it shows a side of Bill that people may not be aware of. It's easy to make an assumption about someone when they have been accepted and stylized as such, right? So for example, Count Basie. Everything is minimalist with Count Basie, right? But he played with both hands. He was a student of Fats Waller. He played stride piano. Thelonious Monk, another example. This is someone that could play classical music, played great stride piano. But the smart musician realizes that, okay, I've got this technique, but how can I use it to my advantage? Does the world need another copy of something that's already been done? Mose Allison is another example of this. Mose Allison played bebop like Bud Powell, and he looked around and he realized, we all sound the same here. I gotta do something different now. If you're a Mose Allison fan like I am, you realize this guy is unique in every way, shape, and form. So it takes a lot of courage and a lot of confidence to be able to make this kind of a move, and in the end it pays off. So Bill played a lot of straight-ahead jazz. He played with Art Farmer and Benny Golson. He played with, of course, on the classic album Blues and the Abstract Truth, Oliver Nelson, Chet Baker. He worked with a lot of straight-ahead musicians, as did Scott LaFaro. At the same time that Bill Evans was making his name known and making the rounds in New York City, Scott LaFaro was very, very quickly coming up to speed on the bass in Los Angeles. Scott LaFaro was a tenor player. He graduated Ithaca College as a woodwind major, and then he got an elbow in the mouth playing basketball, and that ended his clarinet career. So at, I think, 19 or 20, he picked up the bass, and by the time he was 24, he was in New York working with Bill Evans. Talk about dedication. And I mean, he played with everybody on the West Coast. He played with Richie Kamuka and Carl and Frank Rosalino. He played with Hampton Hawes and not Teddy Edwards. Anyway, he played with a vast array of straight-ahead artists on the West Coast. There's an album called The Arrival of Victor Feldman. If you've never heard this record, I urge you to check it out. It's Victor Feldman, Scott LaFaro, and Stan Levy. They do a Miles Davis tune called Serpent Tooth. No, there's another one called, it's a Dizzy Gillespie bop tune. At 350 beats per minute or faster. It's insane. It's called the Arrival of Victor Feldman. Bebop, thank you. That's the name of it. Thank you, Lynn. The Arrival of Victor Feldman. Fantastic record. So Scott's learning straight ahead playing and learning the bass. He's studying with bass players in Los Angeles to get his technique together and to achieve his ability on the bass. It's this groundwork that you have to lay for yourself. This gentleman here asked me if I ever played any Dixieland. When we were kids, we had a family band, and the family band was my brother Pat on clarinet and alto, my brother John on cornet, my father on accordion or piano, depending on what was available, and my mother on the string bass, and me on the drums. The library my father had was comprised of all of the old Sicilian music that his family brought over from Italy, but also Fletcher Henderson, Basie, Benny Goodman, Duke Ellington, Jimmy Dorsey, on and on and on. So the style of drumming that I was playing was like Baby Dodds. I had a bass drum that was bigger than me. I had temple blocks. I had one little cymbal. I played time on the snare drum. My father was literally giving me the history of jazz from my childhood, and then from that point forward, it just evolved into the more contemporary sounds that my brother Pat was bringing home. As much as you can understand about your instrument, and as much as you can understand about the music you want to play, it's going to help you. Bill Evans could play stride piano, he could play boogie woogie, he could play swing, bop, all of it. And yet, with all of that behind him, he was able to arrive at his own voice because he was driven to do that. Not everyone is driven to find their own voice. Some people are content to simply sound good in a particular style and stay there. There's nothing wrong with that. But you have to follow your own urgings and your own instincts in terms of how do you want to sound on this instrument. I've listened to so many different musicians, not just drummers, that have influenced the way I play the drums. And it's the best thing that could have happened for me, because when you just listen to your instrument, you're once again giving yourself a very narrow perspective. So that's something I want to urge you to do. So now back to Bill. So initially he thought he would be a solo piano player because that's what he wanted to do. He wanted to be able to play music, be able to stretch out the time, be able to maybe stay on one harmony for a while, change keys, do whatever he felt like doing without hanging anybody else up. But he also realized, in practical terms, you couldn't go around the country playing jazz clubs as a solo piano player. So he realized, I gotta have a trio. So he put a trio together, but in the back of his mind, he's thinking about this flexibility, about this ability to break away from the tried and true, you know, of the straight ahead, like Red Garland, Philly Joe, and Paul Chambers, totally swinging. Keep that element of swing in there, but make the actual statement of rhythm a little less obvious. Maybe find another way to express the time. And that's something that I don't know that they talked about, but it's something that they arrived at. And those first recordings, Portrait in Jazz, there's a lot of groundbreaking stuff going on there, followed by explorations, and then of course, the recordings from the Vanguard. So in a very short period of time, they were able to come up with this concept as a group, because each member was very important in contributing to what is considered the Bill Evans trio sound. Paul Motion, instead of just playing the ride cymbal and hi-hat on 2 and 4 and some independent comps, was actually playing rhythmic phrases with all 4 limbs. He would actually play phrases of time. Scott LaFaro, even though he could walk at 400 beats per minute, you know, on any tune, was trying to find a way to be a little more conversational within the music. He was trying to figure out a way to be not just a timekeeper, but to always, whatever he was playing, to actually fortify and solidify the time. And Bill was finding ways to restructure the chords in his left hand so that it didn't include the bass note. That's just one example. But Bill was also working very hard at rhythmic displacement, which is a concept where you take an idea and you shift it rhythmically, one direction or another. And that's something he worked very hard at. So we did a couple of clinics when I was with Bill, and young pianists would always say, you know, how deep is the ocean? And, you know, in bar 9, you know, what was that chord you played? Or what was the voicing of that chord? And Bill would tell him, you know, I know exactly what you're talking about. And he knew exactly what chord this person was referring to. But I'm not going to rob you of the joy of discovery. I want you to find it, you know. You should be working within the parameters of the ability and the knowledge that you have right now. Don't try to overreach. Don't try to acquire, and I love this term, he used to refer to this when someone was kind of an imitator. Don't acquire a veneer of this music. You need to dig more deeply into it. He used to say, I know the reason behind every note choice that I make all the time. There's a reason why I picked that note. There's a reason why that chord worked in that particular spot. It's not a formula, you know, it's not a fixed formula in the left hand. It's constantly in motion. It's constantly evolving. So those are just a couple of insights into Bill as a musician, and the fact that he wanted you to come up with your own approach and your own way of playing music based on what you could do at the moment. And I heard a lot of that today, which is a good thing. People are actually playing at their level, and they're making very, very good music. And that's something, that's an achievement, and that's what it should be. Lost my train of thought. I'm gonna stop just for a second because I'm blathering on. Up to this point, any questions about Bill or about the music?
I'd like you could speak briefly about how you rehearsed the trio. Or did you?
We never rehearsed. Yeah, we never rehearsed. That wasn't the way things were done, you know, I mean, and it wasn't just Bill. Benny Green told me that when he joined Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers, the first night, Art called him up. Art said, you know the music, young man? And Benny said, yeah. I said, you better. He said, and he came up and he played because he had been listening to the music, right? He did his homework. I did my homework with Bill. Mark Johnson, of course, did his homework with Bill. But what Bill was after, what Miles Davis was after, what Art Blakey was after, what everyone was after, was someone that could show up understand what the music is about, and take it someplace else. Don't sound like the last band I had. Let's bring your own stamp to this. Let's put a stamp on this version of this trio, or this version of the Jazz Messengers, or this version of whoever, you know. And so no rehearsals.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did you play with Art Blakey?
Well, I worked opposite Art Blakey, but Art's a drummer, so you know.
Oh, that's right.
Did you record for Blue Note Records, and did Bill Evans and you record for Blue Note Records?
No, I never did record for Blue Note Records. I think Bill might have. I mean, I don't know for sure. But Bill and I, when I joined Bill, it was Warner Brothers Records.
But just a question to that, because Blue Note Records have so many original compositions, you know, while the other contemporary and the others have the more general, all standard music. And I've been told, I don't know if you know this, that's right, that is one reason is that Blue Note Records paid for rehearsals
Yes, they did.
before recording.
They did.
Yeah. Of course, that's an important difference.
It's a vast difference. And we're talking about two German immigrants who were escaping Nazi Russia and came over to America in love with Art Tatum and Albert Ammons and Stride piano players. And they decided to start a record label called Blue Note Records. And as they're in New York, they're being exposed to more modern sounds, and they just love it, all of it. And so they're so into it that they're willing to put money on the line to get bands to come in and rehearse. Yeah, that's rare in music, in any area of music.
Can you talk, if you want to, about your relationship with Bill and his problems with heroin and stuff, and did that have an impact on you personally, having to deal with?
Yeah, of course it did. I mean, let's face it, we got very close, and I couldn't just stand by, but I was so naive, and I was 31 years old. I should have known better, but you really can't change someone's mind about something like that. And Bill was adamant about it being his own business, so keep your nose out of it. He always used to refer to it as a personal problem, you know. In the end, of course, it took him very, very early, but also in the end, he did an interview at Southeastern Louisiana, which is where he went to college, at his alma mater, and he said, I have exactly fulfilled my goals. What I started out to do, have a trio, have a position in jazz to be able to record what I want to record, and not feel any constraints. So in his mind, it was a life fulfilled. We're the ones to feel the loss, obviously.
I'm just curious, it seems like every musician finds their way to New York. So what is it about New York that draws the attention of so many musicians?
You know, it was because it was pretty much the center of the jazz world, you know, starting in the 30s. So when Charlie Parker wanted to make a name for himself, he went from Kansas City to New York, right? Dizzy went from, where's he from? South Carolina to New York, right? Everyone gravitated to New York. Basie's band left Kansas City and came to New York. So it was just because it was kind of the center of the universe, culturally, you know. Artists of all orientations were centered there, whether it was physical arts or spoken word, whatever. It was happening in New York. It was also happening in Berlin in a big way, but unfortunately that ended quickly in '39. Yet it was still that way when I got there, because I moved to New York in 1976, and it was still possible to just play gigs, pay the rent, and grow as a musician. It's so expensive now, I don't even know how anybody manages to do it, and yet, young musicians still go there. They still want some of that. They want to get there and they want to see what it's about. So it's a magic. I don't know what else to say.
Yeah, I have had a couple of drummers tell me that, well, there are all sorts of brass women and women players, like me. The first prize, from their perspective, is one who has a high level of rhythmic competency. Can you react to that
Yeah.
observation?
I mean,
And what does that mean to you?
it's one-dimensional, honestly, because unless you can apply that in a musical way in a band, it's just one thing in your bag of tricks. I mean, having sophisticated rhythmic options, that's always great. But if you can't apply it in a musical way, and by that I mean, if you can't bring it down to playing the time and helping the band with it, and I'm not talking about something that sounds and feels like a science experiment, because I've heard and experienced that kind of music, and it leaves me cold. Even though it is spot on accurate, you know, you can put a slide ruler on it or, you know, whatever, and measure it, and it's spot on accurate, but it doesn't move me, right? So it's just one aspect. Just like being able to play, you know, in every key on a tenor, or, you know, can blow your way through the Arvin book, you know, it's like, those are tools to get you to a place where hopefully you're going to use it in a musical manner. This is something that, it's a quote of Bill's that's in the book. Let your intuition guide your knowledge. So if you have this knowledge, trust your instincts to where to apply it, you know. If you just are an intuitive player, you're gonna sound good maybe for a course and a half, and then you're gonna start to falter because you got nothing to back it up with. If you have that knowledge stored and are able to access it quickly, then it's the payoff.
Well, follow up. So how would you rate Sonny Rollins in that regard? He's known as a good rhythmic-oriented woodwinder, or he was anyway.
He's one of the musicians I was referring to when I said I've listened to so many musicians. It's exactly that appealed to me. His rhythmic concept was something that caught my ear, but then I also was impressed by the displacement of his rhythms, and also his willingness to take chances, to just put it out there, you know. You can get very comfortable and secure playing safely, you know, trying to just keeping things under control, and then something like Sonny comes along and you're not prepared for it. So I hold Sonny in the highest regard,
Thank you.
Have you asked a question yet? Okay, you're next.
So you and all of your brothers also have careers in higher ed.
Yeah.
So it seems like sometimes that's a workable thing for a musician to also have higher ed and let the two work together and bounce off of each other. To me, that's kind of a practical aspect of this. Could you talk about that?
Yeah, you know, when I left Tony Bennett in 1992, I had been on the road for so many years. I was burned out, you know, with travel. And plus, my first marriage ended in divorce, and my daughter was coming of age to go to high school, and I thought, I'm gonna just stay in Los Angeles. I'm gonna find a way to stay here. And out of the blue, I went to the IAJE convention and played with somebody's big band down there. And on the flight home, Dave Roystein and Larry Coons were sitting behind me. Dave is the chair at Cal Arts. And there was a tap on my shoulder, and they're saying, you know, Tootie Heath is leaving the drum department at Cal Arts. You want to take his job? Yeah, hell yeah. So I got together with him, we chatted, I met the dean, we chatted, it was a handshake, you know, done deal.
But you just happen to have the skill to teach,
Well, there you go, yeah.
because not everybody that can play well can teach.
My father was a teacher. I watched him teach every kid in my hometown, and he had been doing that before I was born. And after a while, I started teaching clarinet, because I played clarinet and saxophone and drums. So from grade school through high school, I actually played clarinet and alto and tenor. So I started teaching some of my cousins clarinet, you know. So I had some experience at it. But I gotta be honest with you, the first couple of years that I was at Cal Arts, I was just cutting my teeth as a teacher. I was learning because you may have a curriculum and you may have a method of teaching, but my experience evolved right away because each student is different. And I found even with my graduate students, some of them needed the same information that my undergrads needed, but they needed it in a different order. So I had to do a little bit of backfill for everybody. Some of my undergrads could play it really well, but there were holes in their education in orchestral studies, in snare drum etudes and things like that. So everybody needed the body of work that I had to offer, but they just needed it in a different manner. They needed it at a different time and place. But that's something that I sussed out early on as a teacher. And gradually, I also had to sit down and analyze my own playing, which I would never have done. But I had to figure out a way for me to explain to a student when they would ask me about, you know, the way you play the brushes, what do you do? And what do I do? So I had to actually take that apart myself and come up with all of that, you know, the things that I do. At the core of it, though, is the musicianship, the musicality, and that comes from people like Bill and like Sonny Rounds and Miles and all the others that I listen to. They have all influenced what I do, and it's that attention to detail that I always stress with my students, and also options. When a student comes into me on the drums and wants to play something, I make sure that they can play it accurately in one tempo and at one dynamic level. And then the work starts, because now we've got to take it a little faster and accurately and at different dynamic levels, and slower, accurately, different dynamic levels. I don't want this to be a one-trick pony deal where you have to hope and pray that they call the tune at the tempo and the volume that you practiced it at so that you can use that lick. It shouldn't be that way. It should be just something that you can adapt to any situation.
Any comments or advice for young musicians about the business of the music business itself, the business end of it?
I would say, first of all, you should take a music business course. I know you've got one here, right, Mike? Yeah. Okay, because John used to teach that, right?
John taught one for many years.
Yeah. That's important to arm yourself with information, to know what are the areas where you could potentially be at risk. And definitely it's like your publications, right? If you write tunes, you need to make sure that you've got them published. Own your intellectual property. Other than that, know your worth. Don't undersell yourself. You know, I've done that over and over again over the years, and it's a mistake. You know, there's nothing wrong with being paid adequately for the talent that you have. So be aware of that.
How do you even determine that?
Well, you just have to know what's the field that you're in. I mean, when I say field, what arena are you in? What city? What's the going rate in this town, right? What are people making? And if you're that much better than everybody else, then you should be able to demand a little bit more, you know. But that's just off the top of my head thing. Mainly, it's your compositions. You should definitely protect those. And if you're going to sign a contract for anything, whether it's to go on a tour or to do a specific project, you need to really look at it, really scan it, and if you're not sure, you need to ask someone before you sign anything.
Were you guys on the union at that point?
Yeah, I mean, we joined the union when we were in high school. Yes, absolutely, my whole life, and,
Did that help protect you?
sure, I'll give you an example. When the last gig we played with Bill was at a club called Fat Tuesdays in New York. And Bill played the first and second night and then was just physically unable to continue. So the club owner hired Andy Laverne, a fantastic piano player, to come in and finish out the week. But what they were doing every night was saying, they'd get everybody in the house, and then they'd announce Bill Evans is unable to perform tonight, blah, 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 whatever. So we did the rest of the week like that, and then at the end of the week, Mark and I went to get paid. The plumber said, no man, Bill has already drawn all the money. And he probably did, because he was in a bad way at that point. But I wasn't gonna stand for that, so I went to the union. I was in 802 at the time. They called the trial board, and to his credit, the club owner ponied up. What he was really resistant about was that in New York at the time, for a week in a club like Fat Tuesdays or the Vanguard, the going rate for a sideman was about $350. Well, Bill paid Mark and me $750 a week. So he paid us with the stipulation that we didn't tell anybody what we were paid, because otherwise everybody in town is going to want that money, right? So that's an example of knowing your worth, knowing what you should be paid, right? If I was working with just another one of my buds from New York in a club for a week, I wouldn't expect to make that kind of money. But when you're appearing with Bill Evans, damn it, you need to get paid.
Any thoughts about how AI is going to affect the jazz business?
I don't see it negatively impacting it. You know, I'm one of those people that embraces technology as opposed to being afraid of it. I've yet to hear a drum machine that I would want to play along with myself, you know. But there's going to be a way to use it. There's going to be a way to utilize this technology. And this is going way, way back, but I think about Miles when every era in his career, he played pretty much the same way he always played, but the technology allowed him to enhance that. Like, for example, on Bitch's Brew, where he's got the effects, right? So technology is a good thing. I can't really speak to AI. It's a big discussion right now, but I don't see it negatively impacting. I don't think you're gonna find a recording that you're gonna want to buy and listen to over and over again that was created by AI. I don't see that happening. I really don't. And you know why? For the same reason that when movie studios back in the 90s or whenever they were doing this, they decided they were going to eliminate live orchestras and go with synth scores. Not just me, everybody in the audience felt it and heard it. They knew this sounds like crap. This is not an orchestra playing live. You don't feel anything, right? There's no vibration coming out of those speakers. And that's not fantasy, that's reality. So I'm not worried about it.
What did you think about the movie Whiplash?
Oh, you know, Buddy Rich was a friend of mine, and so I thought it was a bad portrayal. I'm not defending Buddy's antics because he was all of that, but in no way was he the reason that this kid was the way he was. I keep going back to Buddy Rich, showing this picture, like, you know, and the band director, J.K. Simmons, his character, was over the charts, over the top, you know, just off the charts. I had never heard of anybody like that, and I said that, and then one of my daughter's high school classmates pulled me aside, and this guy's a drummer on the scene in Los Angeles, and he said, our band director was exactly like that, throwing chairs. I was astonished. So obviously they're out there, but I think it was an exaggeration, you know, of events, and it didn't portray the music in a positive light.
I don't see how anyone learns well like some people do.
Mm-hmm.
Some people like to be pushed like that, but
Yeah. No, I don't get it. And the other thing that I don't get was that with an attitude like that and a personality like that, that in the end, this guy would actually have a gig playing piano in a club, you know, working with other musicians, because his whole mentality was geared toward, I don't know, aggression or not communal feeling. So
Who coming up are you listening to right now?
that's a good question. I hear a lot of young drummers. You know, the young guy that took my place at Cal Arts, Jonathan Pinson. I like what he's doing. Yeah, you got me. You got me right on the carpet here. Oh, well, yeah, but Ari, I mean, Ari is like, you know, he's an old timer now. I mean, I look at guys like Bill Stewart and Joey Barron, who I love. Those guys are like, they're right behind me.
Your favorite female drummer?
Oh, that's easy. That's Terry Lynn. Terry Lynn,
Terry?
yeah, Terry Lynn and I both studied with Alan Dawson back in Boston. Yeah, Terry Lynn. Yeah, but there's one of my grad students, Tina Raymond, is making a big name for herself now with a band called Aesthesis. Check them out. And Tina is now the chair of jazz studies at Northridge University, which makes me very proud. But she's knocking it out, definitely. Yeah. Mike, I see you closing in here. I got.
Oh, it's all right, a couple more.
So when you were with Bill, did he want you to have your own voice? Because like some people, if they had that gig, they would want to try and imitate like Paul Motion.
Yeah, I think I brought this up before, but he did not want a recreation of the last year. When I got the gig with Bill, Elvin Jones was a friend as well, and Elvin said, "Oh man, you know, you're probably gonna have to play quiet all night long." And I thought, I don't know, man. Let me see, you know. So I got in there, and my perception of Bill was as someone that had all of these experiences. I had heard him play bebop and straight ahead and all of that. So I thought, there's a way for me to tap into that. And sure enough, there was never any discussion about volume. If he hired you, he made the assumption that he had assessed you accurately at that audition, that you had the skills, at least the ability, to grow with this music. And so if you paid respect to that, if you were given a lot of freedom, but you also had a lot of responsibility. So you had to respect that responsibility aspect of it. And so I would bust out a lot with Bill, but it didn't stay there, right? Today, one of the things I made comment about in every ensemble was there was kind of a flat dynamic level. So that's something that you want to be aware of on your instrument. Don't stay in one range at one level all the time. Mix it up. So if I could really hit it with Bill and then pull it back, you know. I got as much satisfaction out of just playing a very quiet cymbal roll on a ballad behind one note as I got out of like my solo on Nardis every night. Really, I mean that sincerely. I love to accompany. I love to accompany.